In this video, we will learn what constructors are and how to write them in Java. Back to our example of creating a rectangle instance in the memory, we use the syntax rectangle box is equal to new keyword rectangle, empty parentheses, and then a semicolon. Then we find that we have a rectangle in the memory. However, we never discussed how that was created in the first place. We know that this is the class's name, followed by the reference variable, the assignment operator, and the new keyword. Then the only one left is the rectangle with empty parentheses. This must be the one part that is responsible for creating the instance in the memory. In fact, it looks familiar. It has parentheses, which is very similar to methods. But is it a method? We can think of it as a special method that is called a constructor. A constructor is used to construct objects in the memory. Alright, but we are sure that we didn't define this in our rectangle class anywhere. Then how come we can use a constructor to construct an instance in the memory? That's the thing. If you don't define a constructor to your class, Java will kindly provide you with what is called the default constructor. The default constructor provided by Java will help any class that doesn't have a constructor to instantiate objects from it and make it useful. Nice. So how does that default constructor work? It sets all of the numeric fields to 0. This makes perfect sense. That's why every time we create a rectangle instance in the memory, the length and the width fields were set to zeros. If you have a boolean, the default constructor will set it to false by default. If you have a reference variable as a field in your class, which we will discuss in future videos, Java will set it to null. Notice that the default constructor doesn't take parameters, and that's why you can use rectangle with empty parentheses, but you can create a rectangle with a predefined length and width by passing arguments. So what if we want to create just that? To construct a rectangle that comes pre-configured with values instead of the default zeros. We can define our own constructors, and this is what we will do next. It's important to understand that constructors are special methods that are called only when you instantiate the object from the class. They are usually public, so other codes can use them to create objects. They are also special in the sense that they have the same name as the class, they don't have a return type, not even void. Constructors are not expected to return anything at all, and that's why the header doesn't even consider it. This also means that you can't have a return keyword inside the body of the constructor. So let's follow these steps and create our constructor. It's public, no return type, the same name as the class, which is rectangle. I will use it to set the length and the width fields of my rectangle as it constructs it. When listed in the UML, the constructors are listed at the top of the methods list. Notice that there is no colon after the parentheses of the constructor in the UML. By defining this constructor, you are getting the premium service of creating an object in the memory that has the fields set to the initial values you pass to the constructor. However, it's very important to understand that once you declare your own constructor, Java will stop providing you with the default constructor. We will discuss this further in the demo and in future videos. Before we conclude our video, let's have a look back at the string class and how we use it to construct strings. Remember, we can create the string class using the new keyword and the constructor that is defined in the API of Java to accept a string literal such as Michael Long in this case. This was also the same approach we used with the scanner class by using the scanner constructor that takes system.in as an input. For strings, however, you can create a string object using the shorthand assignment statement. However, this can be done only for the string objects and not any other objects in Java. In this demo, I'm going to modify our rectangle class to include constructors. Remember, as we said, constructors are special methods and they run as you construct an object in your program. So far, when we created a rectangle, what we did is that we used rectangle box is equal to new rectangle. And this by default sets the length and width to be zeros. So if I run this code, it's going to give me length and width equal to 0. even though I didn't set them to 0. But by default, the Java constructor, the default Java constructor provided by Java, is going to set them to zeros because they are numeric values and we did not declare our own constructors anywhere in the class. All right, so what if we want to declare our own constructors? In this case, since they are special methods and usually even in the UML, they are listed first before any other method, I'm going to declare my constructor here at the top. Now, I'm going to say here public because they should be public so you can use them. They do not have any return type, not even void, and that's why we are not going to type anything there. And then they are very special that they share the name of the class. So in this case, this name should match this name. All right, so here they should match because whenever you try to construct something, it should link that to the proper class. So here I'm going to say rectangle, and to make it useful, I'm going to make it take two values, double new length and double new width. And what it's going to do is that as it constructs my object for the first time, as it's performing the instantiation process, it's going to set the length to that new length and the width to the new width. All right, so here I can compile this, perfect, and it's working. All right, now one thing I mentioned in the video is that once you declare your own constructor, Java is not going, it's going to stop providing you with the default constructor. All right, so if I go back to my code and try to create a rectangle object using the default constructor, Java is going to complain. It will say constructor rectangle in class rectangle cannot be applied to given type. Required double double. So now it's trying to link this to the constructor that you declared or defined, which takes two values, double new length, double new width. So that's why it's saying here you are not passing any arguments, but the one that is declared in the class expects double double. And in this case, we found no arguments in your code, and that's why it's actual. The formal argument lists differ in length. All right, so that's the reason. That could be fixed by setting them to, for example, here 5 and 10. Now I compile, it works because it matches. I am passing two values, it's expecting two values. Even though I'm passing two integers, it will upgrade them to double so it doesn't complain about that. So compile, run, and there we go. Notice here that once I created this, the first two values that you get from get length and get width are actually the 5 and 10. Can you see that? So that is how a constructor is used to construct an object with predefined configuration. Now, does it have to take two inputs? All right, so that's the question. Does it have to take two inputs? No, it doesn't. So I could do it in a way that, for example, it takes a single value. That's a constructor that takes a single value, which is the new length, and it's going to set the length to it. But then by default, the width is set to 10. All right, so that's the set of tiles that I'm expecting here. So here I pass a single value 5, which is going to be matched to new length and then stored in length. And width is going to be set to 10 by default. So there we go. All right, if I change this to 90, for example, then here we go, 5 and 9. All right, now you could actually, you don't have to set width in this. I could remove the whole thing. All right, and just do it this way. So by default, 5 is passed as an input right here. So it gets matched to new length, which is going to be assigned to length. Since width was not initialized to any value, it's going to be initialized by default to 0. That's it. All right. Now, the fact that you lose the default constructor sometimes is not nice, because what if I want to keep my default constructor? In this case, and we are going to discuss this in the future, you could create different constructor. You could create another constructor. All right, so I'm going to go back to the full definition of the length and width here. And that's our new nice premium service of creating a rectangle that is initialized to values. Then to go back and get the same default constructor that Java created before, when we didn't declare our own constructors, I can go and define my own constructor that mimics the behavior of the default constructor by Java. So that's a constructor that takes no inputs, similar to the default constructor, and it's going to set the length and width to zeros. So now I have the two constructors, and if I go here, of course it's complaining because you are passing a single argument, and there is no constructor that takes single argument. All right. So here in this case, you can either pass it by two values, in which case it will match this to that constructor, or you could construct something without any values and compile, and it's going to compile with no problem. All right, it's going to set this to 0 and 0. So you can gain or retrieve the behavior of the default constructor by creating it another constructor that mimics the behavior of Java constructor, the default constructor. Now, how many constructors can we build? Technically, any number of constructors, but there are certain rules which we will discuss in the future in this course.